What's up guys, welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to show you how to make this 3D astronaut out of fondant. So first I start by rolling out some black fondant, and you can see I'm adding my edible glue here, which can be found on my website. I'll put a link in the description. I'm just covering a styrofoam ball with it. It's okay to use the styrofoam ball because you can just tell your client that this part won't be eaten, and it just makes sure you have a very perfect circle. You can do a whole ball out of fondant, but it's going to be really heavy and it might be deformed. Right here I'm rolling out some white fondant, and I'm cutting it out in a circle, and you can see I'm just going back over it with a clean sharp razor blade just to make some nice clean cuts. So I roll two of these out, and you can see how I add them to that ball with some edible glue. This is just going to be the part of his helmet, and then I'm just working it with my fingers, and then I'm cutting off any excess with that sharp razor blade. Oh, and I'm also using part of the circle cutter there just to make that curved line, and I'm also using a PenBlade. I'll put a link in the description for that as well. You can find them on Amazon. Just smoothing that part out with my finger, and I'm adding a toothpick at the bottom so it makes it easier to hold and that I can set aside and work on some other things. I have this little handy strip cutter. I'm going to put a link and a coupon code in the description. I'm adding those little strips with my edible glue just to the edge of the helmet, just to make it look a little bit better and fix those edges. And then once I'm done with that, I can just set that aside. I'll usually rest that inside of a piece of styrofoam so it has something to attach to, and that'll ensure the bottom of the helmet stays nice and round and it doesn't dry flat. I'm just making some little details here for the helmet, some little pieces of white fondant and red fondant, and those are cut out with some little round plunger cutters. And you can see here, I just glue them together, and then I'm adding them to the side of the helmet with some edible glue. And right now I'm rolling out some more white fondant, and I'm just measuring to make sure this will be a good size for his body. And I'm shaping it, and I'm cutting it with a multi-purpose cutter from Fat Daddy-O's. I'll put a link in the description for that as well. And I'm making some legs and some arms, just making sure they're not too long. And you can see I cut them at an angle, and that way it fits perfectly onto that body. And then I made some little indentations there around the bottom of his legs. Just reshaping everything as I go along, and then once I like the shape, I'll add some edible glue to the legs and then add the body on top there. It's good to use gum paste. You can also use fondant, but it's good to use gum paste so that it dries nice and hard. If you use fondant, make sure you add some Tylose powder. Here's the little arms. Oh, and this is a big piece of foam that I have. This is really good when you're making 3D fondant characters. And that way you can just rest your character on that foam. And that way the back of it doesn't get super flat. If you laid it directly on your work surface, it would just get super flat in the back. And I didn't want that. So I'm adding the head to the body with some edible glue. If your fondant is too soft, I would wait until your fondant is set a little bit harder before adding the head, because the head will add a little bit of weight. And I'm just adding like that neck gasket part with some fondant. Just get creative. I'm using some circle cutters to rest his arm because I wanted one of the arms like extended and then the other one towards his body. It's really important when you're making 3D characters to add extra details. Details matter. So I'm cutting out some more fondant strips, and then I'm using one of my cake decorating tools just to make some lines on it, and I'm adding that to the very bottom to look like his shoe. And I'm attaching it with my edible glue as usual, and I'm adding a toothpick to the bottom of that. I let him dry in some styrofoam when I was done. I went back in and added that little thin piece of black fondant around the bottom where the shoe is, just for more detail. And then I have some white fondant here, just rolling it in my hands to make two shapes that are similar in size, and these will be the little gloves. And I'm kind of working it with my fingers just to make sure they're not so squared off. Just a tiny bit roundness I'm adding to them. And those will be go where his hands are. And I cut off the tops just so it sits nice and flat. And I glue it with my edible glue. See how I got that hand to extend up and then the other one's flat? I just rested it on those circle cutters for a little bit until that arm stayed in place. Right now I'm going to make that little front panel that they have on the astronaut suit with all the little buttons. So it's good to use a tiny little plunger cutter to make those little round shapes. And I just glue it with my edible glue onto the front of that. And then when that's done, I'll add that to the front of his suit. I'm just making some lines with one of my cake decorating tools. For itty bitty little circles, I like to roll tiny little balls and then you gently squish it with your finger and it turns into a circle. Or you can squish it with the back of a paintbrush like I'm doing here. For the final touch of this astronaut, I'm using some Poppy Paint Super Shine and I'm just going to brush it on the black part of the helmet. And this makes it look really reflective even when it's nice and dry, and it just gives it a really nice touch. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial.